This playlist will collect together and organize the individual component modules, which together will constitute our second lecture covering divine command theory. Now, in the first divine command theory lecture, we focused on metaethical questions and metaethical issues. We asked what gives our norms authority? Why ought our actions to be bound by our norms? And we looked at a particular theory, usually referred to under the name of divine command theory, that suggests that moral norms get their authority because they inherit it from some entity, some lawgiver, some commander, some source. We looked at Plato's criticisms of this view as answers to those metaethical questions. And in this second divine command theory lecture, we're going to shift our focus away from those metaethical issues towards some epistemic issues that we also touched upon at the very beginning of that first lecture. The narrative arc for this lecture is pretty straightforward. We'll start by reviewing those epistemic questions that I introduced in the first divine command theory lecture. We'll talk about 3 epistemic problems that emerge if one tries to uncritically accept the dictates of some moral authority, whether it's an individual or a text or some other entity. And we'll look at 3 illustrative cases, 3 real-world examples where real-world authoritative texts give rise to the problems that we've been discussing. So let's go ahead and look in more detail at the first part of the lecture. As I said, we'll review those epistemic problems. Then we'll see that these epistemic questions give rise to these 3 difficulties. Problems of interpretation. That is, any authoritative text is likely going to have to be interpreted when it's applied outside of the specific context in which it was written. Second, problems of conflicting dictates. Oftentimes, authoritative texts aren't completely consistent internally within themselves. And finally, problems of selective adherence. The tendency that people have to go through a particular authoritative text and select the things that they want to adhere to and ignore or don't follow other dictates that are also present. The first case study that we're going to use to illustrate these problems is the Christian Bible. We'll look at the Christian Bible in relationship to problems of interpretation. Specifically, we'll look at the prohibition against usury within the Christian tradition. Then we'll look at problems of conflicting dictates. And here we'll focus upon the multiple and conflicting accounts of the 10 Commandments. And finally, we'll look at problems of selective adherence. We'll look at unobserved biblical dictates, dictates that we don't follow, but which are clearly prescriptions in the Christian Bible. Now again, even though the Christian Bible is one of the case studies that we'll look at, there'll be 2 others, I want to emphasize that there's nothing about the Christian Bible specifically that we are addressing. These are general problems that arise whenever one tries to uncritically accept the dictates of some moral authority, be it an individual or a text. And so while we talk about Christianity, we'll also talk about other examples of this, and this is a general problem not restricted to Christianity. What were those 2 problems that we looked at originally with respect to divine command theory in the first lecture? We talked about the metaethical problem. Where do our norms get their moral authority? And we expressed that in terms of 2 general questions. What gives our moral norms authority, and why ought our actions be bound by moral norms? We also mentioned an epistemological problem, a problem about moral knowledge, and we expressed that problem through 2 other questions. How or can we know the correct moral norms, and where should we seek that moral knowledge? So now we're in a better position to really articulate what this second lecture is about. Suppose that when you looked at the What is Morality lecture, or you read the text, you said to yourself, all this giving and having reasons is difficult, it's time consuming. I don't really want to do that. can I just do something equivalent to Googling it? Can I just go to some moral authority and then just follow their prescriptions without having to evaluate those prescriptions or give reasons or have reasons or all those somewhat difficult things that we discussed in the What is Morality lecture? And we'll see that uncritically adopting the prescriptions of a moral authority, an individual, or a text doesn't actually allow us either to unproblematically become ethical in our behavior or to avoid giving and having reasons. For instance, how do we decide upon the moral authority that we're going to follow? Chances are we're going to want to give and have reasons for that particular choice. We'll bracket that for now, and we'll look at a second difficulty. Suppose that we do pick a authoritative source, either because we just decide that's what we want for our personal code, or because we're part of a community that generally agrees about what the moral authoritative source ought to be. The question arises then, is that going to allow us to unproblematically accept the dictates of that authority without having to worry about them, to give reasons or to have reasons? Let's end our first lecture module here. In the next lecture module, we'll shift our gaze and examine that first case study.